Deep within the tropical rainforests of South and Central America, an unusual group of mammals make their homes amongst the canopies. As hard to spot as they are cute, these slow-moving mammals are, of course, the sloths. 6 species of sloth live in these forests today, the few surviving members of a once vast order of tree dwellers and giants alike. Today we know sloths as the natural world's embodiment of laziness. But what really goes on in their lives? How did these animals evolve their seemingly detrimental adaptations, and how do they allow them to survive in a world full of predators? To find out, we will be taking you to the sloths themselves, to the rainforests in which they live. We'll be exploring their struggles and evolutionary history in this video, from their evolutionary origins to the predicaments some species find themselves in today. Join us as we explore one of the most unusual groups of animals in the natural world. Perhaps these animals aren't as carefree as we think. Today, 6 species of sloth exist, which are members of the order Pelosa. Pelosa contains not only the sloths, but the 4 extant species of anteaters, as well as the vast array of extinct ground sloths, which could often grow to immense sizes. Collectively, these animals are all known as xenothrans, a wider superorder which includes the armadillos, and their extinct relatives, pampathares and glyptodonts too. Sloths and xenothrans as a whole are exclusively found in the Americas, and evolved specifically in South America, not long after the dinosaurs died out. The 6 species of living sloth are actually split up into 2 families, Choloepodidae, Colobipodidae, and Bradypodidae, Bradypodidae. We commonly know these families as 2-toed and 3-toed sloths respectively. The 2-toed sloths include 2 species and are rather widespread. Linnaeus's 2-toed sloth can be found across much of northern South America, including the rainforests of Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Peru, while Hoffman's 2-toed sloth exists in 2 separate populations. One can be found in a range that stretches from Honduras to Ecuador, with the Andes Mountains serving as a natural barrier splitting them up from a separate group that lives in Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, and Bolivia. 3-toed sloths are slightly more diverse, with 4 extant species. The brown-throated 3-toed sloth is the most common species in the wild, and typically the species that is most commonly represented in pop culture and the media. This species, recognized by the striking dark fur patches next to its eyes, can be found widely across most tropical forests in Central and South America. Closely related is the pale-throated 3-toed sloth, which lives exclusively in the rainforests of South America's northern reaches. Given its close relationship with the brown-throated species, the two are often confused for one another. Visibly different and much more endangered are the maned 3-toed sloth and pygmy 3-toed sloth. The former can be found solely in the Atlantic forest in southeast Brazil, whereas the latter, a critically endangered species, is endemic to the island of Isla Escudo de Veraguas, off the coast of Panama. All sloths are relatively small animals, which can range from around 60 to 80 centimeters, or between 24 to 31 inches in body length. The lightest species weigh around 3.5 kilograms or 8 pounds, while the heavier ones can reach over 7.5 kilograms or 17 pounds in weight. All sloths spend almost their entire lives in rainforest trees, where they are well camouflaged against the twigs and leaves of the canopy. A sloth's long forelimbs are its main means of locomotion, which are well adapted to grasping the branches of extremely tall trees. They can often be seen hanging from these branches, which they do almost effortlessly. These limbs are designed to help them hang from trees without expending any energy, rather than to support their weight. Sloths are also noted for their unique and extremely long body fur. In all other mammals, the fur tends to grow towards the ends of the limbs, whereas in sloths, the hairs of their coat grow away from these parts of the body. This is an adaptation to protect them from the elements as they hang upside down from the branches of a tree. The environments sloths live in are extremely prone to heavy rain as well as high humidity. When a violent rainstorm approaches, a sloth needn't worry about becoming saturated, as excess water simply drips off the long hairs that trail down its limbs and back. At face value, and especially to a fast-moving species such as ours, a sloth doesn't seem to be particularly well adapted to live in a forest where predators are a constant threat. Surely being extremely slow is detrimental when something could climb up or swoop down to snatch you in an instant, right? Perhaps not. A sloth's best defense against jaguars, ocelots, and terrifyingly large harpy eagles is in fact its ability to remain as still as possible. They are in fact one of the most well-camouflaged mammals in the world, with fur that helps them blend into the tree trunks and branches of their wooded surroundings. What happens though if a sloth, who is primarily light brown in colour, finds itself amongst a particularly green patch of leaves or foliage? Well, a secret biological relationship has evolved to counter this very scenario. In the long back hairs of a sloth lives a separate miniature ecosystem that goes about its existence alongside the wider rainforest community. As sloths move so slowly and live in such humid environments, they often find themselves as the hosts to various species of symbiotic algae. As much as that might be a serious medical concern for a human, this is in fact beneficial to the sloth. A formerly light brown animal can soon be transformed into one with streaks of vibrant green along its fur, if enough algae colonizes its fur. This lets the sloth stay hidden wherever it finds itself among the forests, be it next to leaves or the trunks of trees. Camouflage may not be the only benefit to the sloths afforded to it by the algae, however. Moths that feed on the algae will often accompany the sloth on its extremely slow travels, increasing the nitrogen content within the fur as the insects feed. Recent research has suggested that the algae could even contribute to the sloth's nutritional content, either via diffusion into the skin or by promoting the growth of the ecosystem that thrives on its fur. It may even help protect the animal from the harsh sun of the tropical jungle, acting as a natural sun screen with UV absorbing abilities. However, no mammal can spend its entire life rooted in one place, and eventually a sloth will need to move, be it to find food, a mate, or to traverse new territories. A sloth will only move when it really needs to, and when it does so very, very slowly. Most species of sloth move, on average 4 meters or 13 feet per minute. But if danger is spotted or they really need to move, they can increase this marginally, traveling at 4.5 meters or 15 feet per minute. It's not a large increase, but it's all they're capable of. Sloths are as slow as they are due to their extremely low metabolic rate, which allows them to thrive on their low energy diet of leaves. Moving slowly helps them conserve energy and allows them to maintain a low body temperature in very hot environments. As well as relying upon camouflage to evade predators, they move at such a slow pace that some carnivores may actually be unable to detect them when they do. Eagles and big cats are visual hunters that rely upon detecting swift movement in the undergrowth to locate their prey. While a sloth can make an easy meal if they are detected, they may be just as difficult to hunt to one of these predators as a particularly fast-moving animal would be. Sloths sleep for around 9.5 hours per day, and while 3-toed sloths can be active throughout the 24-hour cycle, 2-toed sloths are primarily nocturnal. Even while they are awake, they spend 90% of their time rooted in the same position. While all sloths feed upon an almost exclusive diet of leaves, 2-toed sloths are actually omnivorous and will eat insects, fruits, carrion, and even small vertebrates such as lizards if they can catch them. 3-toed sloths' diets are restricted to the leaves of only a few species of trees, which means they are very limited in the parts of forest they can live in. Leaves cannot be digested easily, and as such, sloths have the slowest digestive systems of any mammal. Sloths have evolved multi-chambered stomachs which gradually break down leaves. Sometimes the entire digestion process can take up to an entire month to complete. Sloths will remain in the same tree for as long as they can, but will occasionally need to leave the safety of their home. So a sloth's life, then, is primarily spent hanging upside down from the branches of trees. They sleep in this position, they eat in this position, they give birth in this position, and sometimes they even die in this position. Hanging in this way expends little to no energy for the sloth, and it can easily remain hanging even after the body finally gives out. In life, however, these animals occasionally need to leave the safety of the trees. Sloths are at their most vulnerable when they are on the ground, which they must do at least once every 8 days to defecate. Why, though? Would a sloth potentially risk its life to leave its waste on the ground when it could simply drop it from the branch it's hanging from? There are several theories as to why they do this. The most recent theory involves the animal's evolutionary history. Sloths evolved from animals that lived and defecated on the ground, and there may not have been enough evolutionary pressure upon them to stop doing so. While they are vulnerable while traveling across the ground to reach a new tree or to find a mate, sloths don't often get preyed upon when they leave a tree to routinely deposit their waste. So why change? Other theories state that the sloths leave their home to defecate in order to cover their waste manually so the scent doesn't attract predators to the tree, and that the chemicals in sloth waste can actually attract potential mates who are ready to breed. The moths that feed on the algae within the sloth's fur may also lay their eggs in sloth waste, and so this can also help to make the relationship more mutually beneficial. Sloth waste can also help to fertilize the trees around them, encouraging the growth of new plants and maintaining the health of old ones over time. Surprisingly, sloths are much quicker in the water than they are on land, which helps them immensely, given the fact that many species live across the Amazon River basin. Other populations, such as those on isolated Caribbean islands, can actually traverse short stretches of seawater to get from A to B. In the water, they use their arms as paddles, which allow them to swim at speeds of up to 13.5 meters, or 44 feet per minute. In the water, sloths can reduce their metabolism to an even lower point, and will reduce their heart rate to less than a third of its usual resting point, which can allow them to hold their breath for, shockingly, up to 40 minutes. That's longer than dolphins, manatees, hippopotamuses, and certain species of whales can hold theirs. Sloths have an established breeding season, which can vary from species to species. As you can imagine, finding a member of your own species, let alone a suitable female that is ready to mate, cannot be easy when you move as slow as a sloth does. This is even trickier considering that all sloth species are solitary and only come together to find a mate. As such, they have developed a few techniques over time that have helped them find a partner as quickly as possible. These techniques actually differ in two-toed and three-toed sloths. When a female three-toed sloth is ready to mate, she will make the arduous journey to the top of her tree and will let out a loud, high-pitched call, akin to a scream, that will alert all nearby males that now is the time to make a move. Males will then proceed to leave their tree and will crawl across the ground, following the sounds emitted by the fertile female. This in itself is a very slow process, as sloths cannot walk and are at their most vulnerable here. Males will then climb to the top of the tree and proceed to mate with the female, in theory. Often, as this is a rare opportunity, multiple males will find their way to the female at the same time, which can result in intense sparring matches between the two. It's actually a rather fast-paced fight for a sloth, and sees the two males swipe at each other using their long forelimbs. If either party was to lose their grip and fall at this point, it could spell doom for one and an easy victory for the other. In most cases, however, the losing male will simply back down and will return to his tree while the other passes his genes onto the next generation. Two-toed sloths are a bit more subtle with their mating rituals. When a female is ready to mate, she will begin marking tree branches in the immediate vicinity with pheromones from special glands at the base of her torso. This scent will be picked up by males in the area who are ready to mate. As the scent can take time to reach neighboring males, this process is often more drawn out than it is in three-toed sloths, and often results in one male claiming his position as the father of the next generation. Ironically, it's a case of survival of the fastest. In all sloths, one baby will be born after a gestation period of around 6 months for three-toed sloths and 1 year for two-toed sloths. The babies will then proceed to stay with their mothers for around 5 months until they are large and strong enough to fend for themselves. It is at this time that the babies are at their most vulnerable. They will learn which foods are safe to eat by licking the lips of their mother after she eats something, and will observe as she searches for the freshest browsing available. Baby sloths are particularly vulnerable to falling, as they spend almost all their time clinging on to their mother's fur. If they do fall, even a short drop can be fatal. Some mothers are simply unwilling to descend the tree to retrieve their young if a fall does take place. If this happens, sadly the youngsters will be extremely vulnerable to attack from predators, which will be a severe detriment to populations of endangered sloth species. Usually, female sloths can give birth to one youngster a year, but can occasionally miss out if a suitable male is not found. The life expectancy of sloths in the wild is not accurately known, as it is hard to track an individual from birth to death. Three-toed sloths are thought to live, on average, between 20 to 30 years in the wild, whereas two-toed sloths may live shorter lives, reaching roughly the age of 16. Sloths tend to fare well in the care of humans, and there are reports of individuals reaching the ripe old ages of between 50 and 54 when their habitats are replicated well and natural behaviors are encouraged. This implies that in the wild, most sloths will eventually fall victim to predators, or will be affected by habitat loss brought about by the advancement of humans in the areas in which they live. When we think of sloths in a prehistoric sense, we tend to picture the mighty ground sloths of North and South America. Genera such as Megatherium and Eremotherium were some of the largest and most powerful animals in the world when they were alive, and look almost nothing like the sleepy tree dwellers that hang from branches in the modern day. The ground sloths are not ancestors of the modern tree sloths, yet represent a different series of branches on the evolutionary tree. The lineages that would become the three-toed and two-toed sloths split off from one another around 28 million years ago, and each group is related to separate families of ground sloths. This means that both two-toed and three-toed sloths evolved their slow, tree-dwelling lifestyles independently of one another, in an example of convergent evolution. Across the Cenozoic era, sloths were extremely diverse. While some grew to the size of elephants, others were adapted to a life in the water, as seen in Thalassocnus, a species from the Pliocene of Peru. Others, such as Diablotherium, may have been adapted to a mountain environment, climbing to high altitudes in the uplands of South America. The tree sloths we know and love today evolved from ground-dwelling ancestors that slowly adapted to a life in the trees as dense forests began to appear around the northern reaches of South America. Abandoning their larger body sizes and tendencies to be on the move constantly, they opted for one of the most unique and specialized lifestyles amongst mammals. It seems to have served them well throughout their time on Earth so far, as long as enough of their habitats remain untouched by human hands. While the megafaunal ground sloths died out due to human hunting and climate change towards the end of the last glacial maximum, the tree sloths could survive, small and unnoticed in their rainforest refuges. Early sloth species were shown in a select few examples of rock art, such as the red ochre depictions found on rock faces in what is today Colombia. Elsewhere in the Americas, bone artifacts, most likely used as jewelry by ancient humans, have been found which may be attributable to the ground sloths, indicating that these creatures were coexisting with humans between 30 to 15,000 years ago at the earliest. Early settlers in the Amazon rainforest would have hunted tree sloths too, climbing trees or shooting them down to obtain their meat. The historical record saw sloths recognized by Western science in 1551, when Swiss naturalist and physician Conrad Gessner described the animal, publishing it alongside an illustration in Volume 1 of Historia Animalium. Gessner knew of no living animal in the Old World with which he could compare the sloths he saw, and he was likely only describing the sloth he did see from a dead specimen. He believed it was an undiscovered form of arboreal monkey, giving it the generic name Arctopithecus, which translates into English as bear ape. Like the ground sloths that would be discovered in fossil form over 100 years later, he drew the sloth walking on all fours rather than hanging from a tree, but did note its arboreal nature. Legendary naturalist Carl Linnaeus, for which the Linnaeus' two-toed sloth is named, would add to this description in 1758 in his 10th edition of Systema Naturae. He recognized two species of sloth rather than the 6 we know of today, placing them both in the genus Bradypus under 2 separate species. He correctly identified that sloths were not monkeys, but incorrectly placed them alongside elephants and manatees in his now outdated system of ordering mammals. It wasn't until 1817 that Georges Cuvier, another well-accomplished naturalist, noted that sloths should correctly be placed alongside armadillos and anteaters in the mammal tree of life. Where, though, did the name sloth come from? Well, it was already in use for centuries before the animals were first spotted in the rainforests of the New World. It can trace its origins back to the Old English word sleuth, pronounced sloth, meaning to be lazy or in a state of torpor. This then evolved into the Middle English word sloth, pronounced sleuth, which specifically meant laziness. The word sloth arose in New English to represent the same meaning. Sloth, as you may have noted, is one of the 7 deadly sins in Christian theology, which can refer to a person's apathetic or lazy demeanor. The first Europeans to have seen a living sloth in the wild were quick to note its exceptionally slow way of life. With Christianity having a tight hold over European society at the time, a seemingly appropriate word was adopted for the animal's name. In other European languages, the same thing happened. Explorers saw the animal for the first time and named it for its behavior. In Portuguese, Spanish and French respectively, sloth translates to preguiça, perezoso, and paresseux, which all center around the concept of laziness or being slow. It's a fitting name, but perhaps one that was given for the wrong reasons, given how ingenious these animals' camouflage mechanisms actually are. Human advancement into the Amazon rainforest and islands off the coast of Central America has ravaged populations of certain sloth species over the years. The worst victim of this has been the pygmy 3-toed sloth, a now critically endangered species that lives only on Isla Escudo de Veraguas in the Caribbean. Here, it lives exclusively in the red mangrove trees along the coastlines of the island, which is only around 4.5 square kilometers or 1.7 square miles in area. As of a 2012 census of pygmy 3-toed sloths on the island, there were only 79 left, and while their population has always been low due to their tiny range, they appear to be dropping in number rapidly. Timber harvesting on the island, as well as human settlement, have left the sloths without mangrove trees to call home, and many have died as their suitable habitat becomes more and more restricted. This leaves only a select few animals whose genetic variability will be increasingly low, leading to birth defects and vulnerability to diseases in future populations if conservationists cannot manage the decline. Conservation efforts to protect the species have focused on maintaining and isolating the habitats frequented by the animals, as well as monitoring the few surviving sloths with radio collars, in order to better understand their habits and preferences. After the pygmy three-toed, the next most endangered species is the manned three-toed sloth, which has become restricted to the Atlantic forest of southeast Brazil. The IUCN has previously listed the sloth as endangered, which again can be attributed to deforestation and habitat loss in the regions it inhabits. The sloth has been restricted to about 7% of its original habitat size before the advancement of human industry in the area, with the lumber and logging industry having had a severe impact on the animals. Much like the pygmy three-toed sloth, the man species is currently suffering from poor genetic diversity, with inbreeding taking place in the small patches of fragmented forest it is able to live in today. Conservationists have been able to establish a variety of forest reserves, such as the Una, Poco das Antas, and Augusto Ruschi biological reserves in the Atlantic forest, which is slowly helping them to recover. Thankfully, the manned three-toed sloth could represent a conservation success story. In 2009, thanks to the efforts made by organizations such as the Sloth Conservation Foundation, the IUCN Down listed the species from endangered to vulnerable on the red list of species. Hopefully, with future efforts, we can soon hope to see the manned three-toed sloth's population stabilizing once more. Sloths are at their most vulnerable when traveling across the ground to reach new tracts of forest, to find a mate, or to deposit waste on the forest floor. Sometimes they need to travel across busy roads that separate swaths of forest, which can spell disaster for such a slow-moving species. In the past few years, several videos have arisen online of individuals helping sloths to get from one side of a busy road to the other, carrying them across to the other side. While traffic incidents are not linked to a vast number of sloth deaths, they still contribute to the wide variety of human-induced factors affecting these species. And it's certainly something that people who share their home regions with sloths should be aware of. You will be pleased to know that the remaining 4 species of sloths alive in our rainforest today are not endangered. The IUCN lists them as least concern on the red list, the safest position a species can be in. The brown-throated three-toed sloth, the most common species of sloth in the world, has a colossal range in the forests of Central and South America today, and is showing no signs of, proverbially, slowing down. While this is a more adaptable species than some of the others, its habitat has still been ravaged by logging activity over the years. But its persistence is hoped that other species will be able to make a recovery if conservation teams can preserve enough tracts of suitable forest. With time, we can hope to hear the shrill screams of sloths echo out across the forests for millennia to come, as viable, healthy genes are passed down to the next generation. There is more than meets the eye, then, to being a sloth. As relaxed as these animals might seem, there are a lot of ecological factors impacting their day-to-day lives in the rainforests of Central and South America. What comes across as laziness is indeed a finely tuned defense mechanism, perfected over millions of years of evolution. You don't need to be a fast-moving species with a lot of weaponry to make it in the natural world. Sometimes slowing things down and approaching life from new angles is the way to go.